Hi everyone and welcome back. My name is Lesego Mphirime. We are here to empower you in managing your contract. I have an LLB degree. I also have an electrical engineering degree, and I have a few years in managing contracts, about 12 years. So for today, we'll be talking about how do you manage your contract without losing money? How can you still make a profit? There are 5 steps that I'll be sharing with you today. What we need to understand is that for the employer, you have a requirement, you have scope that needs to be done, and you have a budget as to how much that scope is going to cost you. And as the employer, you don't want to spend any more than you need to. So it's in your interest to make sure that the contract is managed correctly. And for the contractor, remember, you have a main responsibility to make sure that you complete the works. But you also have an interest to say you want to complete the works within quality, within time, but still keeping the profit that you had initially when you proposed for the works that you are now awarded the contract for. So both parties have an interest not to overspend. But in reality, in contract management, there are things that if they are not done, we end up losing money. So how do we help you? Let's get right into it. So the first step that we are going to look into is the scope of work. This is the most important thing in contract management. It's the reason why we are all in this contract together. So for the employer, remember you are compiling the scope of work. So make sure that your scope of work is clearly defined. Make sure that there are no ambiguities in what you are requesting the contractors to do. Make sure that your expectations are outlined in your scope of work. Make sure that your internal team has reviewed the scope of work. We find cases where the scope of work is issued, but it has not been reviewed internally. So now what that means is we are taking a risk to say, when the market responds, within a few weeks or within a few months, we'll be exposed to compensation events, we'll be exposed to claims. So the role of the employer or the role of the client is to double check and triple check and make sure your scope of work document is watertight to avoid losing money on compensation events and claims. Now for the contractor, remember you are putting together a proposal, but your pricing in your proposal is normally derived from your scope of work. So you cannot separate your scope of work and the pricing that you'll be putting forward, right? So it's in your interest to first make sure that you have gone through the scope of work. Normally there are clarifications meetings where you have an opportunity to ask questions on things that you are not certain about in the scope of work, so that eventually when you put together your proposal, you are confident on your scope of work. So as the contractor, as the employer, the first step into avoiding to lose money is to make sure that you do the upfront work. Double check, triple check the scope of work. Because remember, for the contractor, you cannot come later on in the contract and say you are unable to finish the works because you are running low on money, and your reason being that you priced low from the start. The employer will not accept that. So make sure that when you put your price, it is the price that you are able to complete the scope in. And make sure that if there are assumptions, Maybe there's certain assumptions you had when you put your proposal together. Maybe one of your assumption is today is to say the proposal assumes that you'll get access on this and this date, or your proposal assumes that the employer will provide 1, 2, and 3. If you have any assumptions that you are basing your cost on, it's advisable that in your proposal, I would line some of those assumptions so that later, should you need to rely on that when you say you have priced yourself low, at least the employer is not seeing that for the first time. The contract manager, because remember, the employer and the contractor will put together or will both appoint their contract management teams. So now for the contract manager, either on the employer side or on the contractor side, your main role is to ensure that the contract becomes your friend. Remember, the parties have put their requirements in place. They've put together what they want. Now your role is to understand what did the employer say the contractor must do, and what is expected from the contractor to do, right? That's what you manage on a day-to-day. Hence, your contract is your friend, especially the scope of work. The second step that we need to focus on is record keeping. In contract management, records are like gold. They are very valuable. So we normally win or lose disputes, or win or lose claims, or even court cases based on the records that we keep. We could be just looking for that one letter that will actually save the whole case. But for some reason, no one can find it. So record keeping is very important. Because remember, when you write letters, try to make sure that you write the letter as if we are going to rely on it. Today already, I know you've issued a number of letters, right? So tomorrow, just try to make sure that when you write those letters, you also focus on the content, because you could be saying no in your letter. But when we pick it up and we are looking for the part where you are actually saying no and we don't find it, then it becomes difficult to even rely on that. So be brief, be clear, be direct, but the quality of the letter needs to be able to keep us to say, you said no, it's a problem. So we need to make sure that our filing system, our record keeping is up to date. And remember, on the contractor side now, if you have done work or extra work, or you've done a compensation event, or you think you have money due on a claim, which can be valid, can be a valid claim. But if you have not issued that notice, and if you have not issued or have not been issued with an instruction, which are your bases? Remember, for your claim, you would need to rely on the notices that you would have issued. And then for your compensation events, you might need to rely on the instructions that you were given. Then in the absence of that instruction, you lose out. So it's key that you make sure that from the contractor side, from the employer side, our record keeping is up to date. So the third item that we'll discuss is engaging your cross-functional team. Remember, your engineering team, your maintenance team, your construction team, or those that you have in your project on the ground. Those are people that normally would know about things before they actually get out of hand, right? So as the contract manager, it's your role to also manage your stakeholders. It's your role to have a good working relationship with your team on the ground, so that when things are not going right, they quickly inform you and you are able to deal with those issues quickly. There's a defect in the plant. While you are busy with your project, they inform you. An equipment just is blowing steam or an equipment just broke down, they quickly inform you. So you are able to manage things before they completely are destroyed. Why? Because you've maintained relationships with your cross-functional team. And in most cases, remember, because they are on the ground, they have factual information, right? So you can keep your eyes and your ears also on the ground to make sure that you get first-hand information and you get it as quickly as possible. The step that we are looking at is to schedule regular meetings. Yes, I know it might sound simple, but meetings play a big role in managing our contract. It helps you to be in control of what is the current issues. It helps you to maintain the relationship between the client and the contractor. But having regular meetings helps you to be in charge of issues, because matters are normally raised in this weekly or monthly commercial meetings, that you can deal with them as soon as they are raised. Because remember, sometimes when we don't hold these meetings, it means we are now having a relationship based on letters. Because if we don't talk in meetings, it means we are going to be talking in another form. So having a situation where the contract managers on both sides are writing letters back and forth, things don't move. We don't get productive. But when we know that next week we're going to be having a meeting and I'll be raising this issue, and I know that she will look into it or he will look into it, or I raise it now, then in the next meeting I follow up on it. There is a level of productivity, and that keeps things moving. Even where there's a slight delay, we are able to come back. So meetings, when the agenda has been put properly and focused on the right things and the right questions are being raised in those meetings, will be able to save you time, will be able to save your claims, and will be able to continue building the relationship between the parties. Look at is risk management. Remember, risk management is a responsibility of both parties. When the contractor sees something, you raise it. When the employer sees something, you raise it. But the trick for the contract manager is to make sure that you are responsive. Immediately you get an early warning, you react to it. You call the risk reduction meeting, you put together proposals as to how you're going to deal with the risk. The minute you get a notice from the contractor or a notice from the employer, you deal with it proactively, immediately, or as soon as possible, right? Because remember, when a risk is identified early and it is addressed early before it even materializes, then we save on time and we save on money. For example, if you know that there is equipment that is coming or that is that you're expecting to ship in, and for some reason you pick up that there's a risk of the shipment being delayed, then you issue your early warning, right? You issue your early warning, and the parties come together, the contract management team, to come up with proposals to say, if we don't get this shipment by this date, we would have lost 2 weeks. And 2 weeks in a project is a lot of money. So, and if you lose that 2 weeks, remember, it's either going to be carried by the employer or it will be carried by the contractor. But that loss would go somewhere, right, between the parties. So hence, it's important that when we are approaching a risk or when we are managing a risk, we come in a collaborative manner to say, what do you propose? What do you suggest? How do we deal with it? What is the alternative? Maybe we're going to use a ship to bring it here, but based on the quantum of the delay that we would experience should this material get laid, we might look into other alternative options of getting that material here. If it means getting a flight to fly whatever material that you need this side, but at least you've raised it, the parties have an opportunity to look into it, and an alternative solution has been found, and the impact on the project has been minimized. Because remember, when we are in a project and we come with a view of a win-win, as a contractor, you are not in it to just win-win yourself while the employer is losing. That's not good practice. And for the employer, you are not just saying no for the sake of saying no, right? So somehow, if the parties are coming together to say, we have this risk, if it materializes as the employer, this is what I would have lost. As the contractor, this is what I would have lost. Come together, come up with an alternative, then we are able to save time, we are able to save money. At the end of the project, we both live with something that we are happy about. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll see you on the next video.